Sure.
So the first question I had was, I know you're teaching a course right now, English 1000, or at least like I'm involved in the course, and you mentioned teaching another course about like superheroes and things like that. Like, but can you speak about like your like the doctor you're pursuing?
Yeah, I'm working on. Well, the way we do it here is like everybody's just getting a PhD in English. There's no like, other than the specializations in creative writing, nobody has a specialization. But in reality, we all have specializations, right? Like, so my specialization is contemporary American literature, mostly fiction, and I'm really interested in not just. I guess the way I approach it is I'm trying to look at how the way fiction works at a particular moment tells us how people in that particular era think. So my dissertation is about how in the last 15 years we've had this like fad for highbrow genre fiction. In other words, like guys and women who are already like literary authors and winning big awards and things like that, and that the kinds of people who 30 years ago would have sneered at genre fiction are now like occasionally taking breaks in their literary career, and they're going like, okay, I'm writing a serious domestic novel, and then my next novel is about zombies or something. And so I'm writing about that and how that shows us like the way that in the last 15 years we really think about the differences between highbrow art and lowbrow art, and the ways in which maybe our current generation is less willing to distinguish between these things, or maybe we more easily move back and forth between our appreciation of those things.
Crime in New York, but he doesn't address like crime in like other rural areas of like the world. I guess he just like kind of says that, oh, look at the black community in this city, and then look at what they're doing to reduce crime, and then this person from Washington D.C. and like St. Louis and all these other like it's different parts of the nation kind of react differently to how.
I mean, let's unpack some of what he said. So like part of his argument is that that 93% of crime against black men is by other black men. Dyson points out in the essay that 83% of crime against white people is by other white people. Why do you think that is, first of all? What's the explanation for those things? I mean, this is like not rocket surgery.
Because they spend most of their time together?
Yeah,
like hang out with those people?
Right. Much of America, particularly urban areas, is still, not even urban areas, but suburban areas, small towns, everything but the country, which you can't really say to be segregated since people live far apart from each other. Like much of America still has like de facto segregation, right? There's no legal segregation anymore. But you have like black neighborhoods and black public schools and white neighborhoods, and there are some communities that are like integrated in really awesome ways, but there are a lot of my high school, I don't know, I had a high school of 2,000 students, 1,800 students maybe. I bet we didn't have 100 black kids, and then like many of them lived in the same two parts of town. Right, like, so even if there's no law setting that up, right, like that's still segregation, right? So the thing is that, the crime is gonna happen like around the people, in your neighborhoods, in your space. If this is all you have around you, right, like that's where the crime is gonna be, of course. Okay, so thing number two that Giuliani said it's worth bringing up here. So he says like 70 to 75% of all crime in New York is committed by black men. Let's assume that stat's right. I didn't look it up. Where do you think he gets that stat from? How do you what thing are you actually measuring when you say 70 to 75% of all crime?
Convictions?
Maybe arrests, but probably convictions. What's the problem with that as a measuring stick? You can think back to Coates, think back to Alexander.
Well, if there's any biases there, then a lot more black people are getting arrested just because of the biases that already exist. It's not really like indicative of real crimes. There could be a bunch more white people doing crimes that they just didn't arrest.
Right.
It's kind of like what they're talking about where police officers like patrol certain areas specifically and they go after certain people specifically over others, where like a white kid walking down the street and a black kid walking down the street, like they're gonna go look for the black kid versus before the white kid.
And you said it's for English majors, but coming in, I would assume before going to like graduate school, were you an English major when you were getting your undergrad?
Yeah, but I didn't start out that way. I started off as an electrical engineering major at a satellite campus of Indiana University. Well, it's Purdue, Indiana campus together. It was at the time it was a tiny school. Now it's a like biggish 4-year school with like dorms and stuff. But when I was there, it was like effectively a community college that had IU and Purdue slapped on the door, right?
Yeah.
But a couple of years in, I found the engineering work really boring, like just mind-numbingly so. And I'd always liked, reading and talking about literature, and I sort of believe in like the cheesy kind of thing that, part of the reason we study the liberal arts is because they make us better people. And so I wanted to work on that more, and so I transferred schools to Butler University, and there I finished my bachelor's degree. And the year before my senior year, I got deployed to Iraq because I was in the Army Reserve at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I missed a year and a half of school total, and I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do going forward. And in that year and a half time, I decided that, like, for sure I wanted to go to grad school and ultimately be a professor. Like, I love my research, but I like teaching a whole lot more than my research.
Do you think the time you spent while deployed was really crucial in like solidifying that fact, or do you feel like if you had just been allowed to continue, you would have still ended up in grad school?
I might have, but I don't think I would have had like the same concrete idea of what I wanted to do. I had inklings of what I wanted to do, and had I just gone straight through, I probably still would have done it, but I think I would have been less successful at it. I wouldn't have had as much time to reflect on why I wanted to do it, who I was doing it for, myself, but also, future students, right? Like, and I also think that life experience is really important, and not to say that I didn't have life experience before getting deployed to Iraq, but there's something to that shaped how I think and how I think about what I wanted my place in the world to be.
It adds on to you as a person,
right?
Yeah, because I come from a military family, mm-hmm. and my dad served in the Air Force for 20 years, and like being like raised in a military environment mm-hmm. was definitely something that, like, even though it's little things now, because I've been away from that for I think maybe like 6 or 7 years now. Mm-hmm. I still when I see people and how they interact with others, I kind of still associate kind of the respect level of the military. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's definitely made me a little more successful in certain ways.
Right.
I mean, granted, coming out of my dad retired, going from military level education to public school, mm-hmm. I was very behind. But I feel like in the same sense, or I would imagine, I felt a little more determined. Like, I was like, I need to go to school. Like, coming out the military, my dad was hell-bent on getting his master's, mm-hmm. and he uses GI Bill for a lot of supporting that. Like, did any of your service and going to grad school right after, did that do you have family around you to support you for that, or was it an independent thing?
No, I mean, I was married when I moved here. Mm-hmm. But no, I mean, my now ex-wife, but she and I hadn't lived in the same town as my family for 4 or 5 years before I moved to Missouri, and then I moved here, knowing nobody, except for the few graduate students I met when I did recruiting days, because I sort of narrowed things down to 3 different grad schools. I went to recruiting days, and but yeah, I mean, I came here knowing nobody, but thankfully, like, my department was really, we built a pretty, like, a lot of us new graduate students built a pretty close-knit support group that helped all of us succeed, I think. Now, because I came here first as a master's student and then stayed on for my PhD, a lot of the people I came with are gone, but I have other kind of support groups, both, in my department and outside of. I mean, like, being involved in a lot of the activism on campus this year has made me feel connected to things beyond the English department in a way that I really hadn't in my previous 6 years.
And I know, like, speaking even more on, like, the activism on campus, when I feel like the primary, like, event that kind of, like, catalyzed people realizing the graduate or the graduate students were protesting was when the healthcare situation kind of, like, it seemed like it went from a decision was made to kind of a huge, like, rush to fix,
Right.
like, people talking about it. Do you feel like things have been changed? Like, do you feel like the protests and all the organization was successful in what it did?
Yeah, of course. I mean, not yet. I don't want to call it a success to imply that things are done. Because I think that, I mean, I've said in class, and even though I probably shouldn't say in class, I think that Tim Wolf was wrong for this university for, like, a whole number of reasons that have to do, with his business rather than academic background, his, inaction with the grad insurance, his inaction with racism, his inaction with Planned Parenthood, and the campus's sort of sketchy history with sexual assaults that weren't being properly investigated. Like, there's a whole number of things that, like, people overlooked, and I think that's this year, right? I think it started with the grad insurance, but I think it sort of created this, or helped create, I don't want to say it did by itself, helped create this, like, sort of broader sense of activism that, clearly, like, people had been protesting campus racism for years, but it had been, like, smaller groups, right? And it was hard for them, I think, to make people who didn't see it every day care. And I think that's the case with a lot of grad students. Like, I think that a lot of grad students are, sort of in your research hole all your time. You're barely interacting with people other than your colleagues and maybe people you have drinks with. But you sort of shut out the rest of the campus a lot of times. You're not aware of what's going on. But then sort of, like, all these things came together and made people who had been sort of shut off to the problems of other people, and I think it just sort of created this big climate of activism. But I do think that, the big thing this year, like, we started off, like, the very first week we had a walkout, right? Like, that's, and that was, that was serious. I mean, there was the day we had lost our insurance, and this is the thing that's been, like, in the news and stuff too, so I'm not telling you any, like, insider information or something, but like, the day we lost our insurance, a woman, like, a graduate student, was, like, so stressed out from losing her insurance because she was pregnant, like, that, like, the next day she miscarried, and then didn't have health insurance to go, like, make sure everything was okay after miscarrying, right? I mean, clearly not everything was okay, but then her personal health was taken care of, right? Like, that is fully unacceptable, like, and the university just had, like, no idea, like, but it was unconscionable to me.
Now, all that's happened, especially at the university, I feel like the tensions have, like, risen to, like, I wouldn't say a boiling point, because there's no, I feel like it would be unfair to put a cap on, like, the problems that are here, because there's so much more that could go wrong, but also things could be better. And I feel like everyone's working to make them better, but being someone who, while the university may not fully recognize it, but does work for the university.
Right.
How do you feel about teaching here? Granted, all the actual like public, I guess the university being in the public view. How do you feel like working at the institution?
It's the university makes me angry, but it's something totally separate from my work here and my teaching here. Leaving here when I finish my PhD, I actually think that I'm going to have pretty good job prospects. I don't know if you read like comment sections on news articles or whatever, people are like, oh, these protesters, these crybabies are ruining the reputation of the university. Like, no, actually, like, to people who aren't like backwards racist, like, we're actually like improving the view of the university in a lot of places, right? Like that we're recognized as a group of people, both as the grad students, people protesting for Planned Parenthood, people protesting for racial reasons. That's a good thing. Like, people see, at least, I have friends who are professors at other universities, at other good universities, and they're like, totally supportive of what we're doing here. And these are the kinds of people who are going to be hiring me when I leave here, right? So while it's often very frustrating, like on Friday, I don't know if you saw on the news, like Chancellor Foley sent out the email that was sort of vaguely, or not so vaguely, threatening us for trying to unionize, which is also like totally against the law for him to do that, right? Like, you're not allowed to actively discourage people you're supervising from unionizing. Like, that's against Missouri law. I was really mad Friday night, but like, that's something that's totally separate from my teaching and totally separate from what I'm going to carry away from here. And I say, like, yeah, I was a Mizzou graduate. I worked with great faculty, great people in my field. My administrators are out-of-touch assholes sometimes. But so is, like, at every university, right? Like, it's a pretty common thing now.
It's a similar struggle, but the shared experience, like, here is something you want to, like, treasure, at least to a point.
Yeah, and like I said, it's something, like I said, I've made a lot of friends as a result of this. I feel more connected, actually, to the student community than I did before. Because we're fighting for common or at least overlapping goals. But I also think that, like, not that it's all about the job market, but when I'm on, out looking for a job, like, oh, you were part of these people who, like, made these changes. Like, you guys actually successfully unionized your grad students. Like, good for you. That's going to be good for me going forward, I think. But on days like Friday, it's... you follow me on Twitter. You probably saw the mean things that I posted.
Yeah, I felt like because I saw what happened before. It's funny because I follow a few other like graduate students because I feel like it's easier to get the news from them before MU will like actually talk about it. And most times I feel like that's sometimes right. That's what I do with a lot of the protesting too. It's easier to follow Concerned Student 1950 than it is the Maneater at times.
Right. Although I do think, like, especially this year, the Maneater has done a phenomenal job.
Oh, yeah,
covering everything.
Some very, not only like quick, but reliable, I think.
Yeah, and reliable more than some other, even local, but certainly like than the national news stories. Like,
oh yeah.
And then also, what surprised me is that they've not been critical of protesters, whether it's grad students for Planned Parenthood or Concerned Student 1950. The Maneater has never criticized protesters for like taking too radical of a stance, right? It's always been like the protesters are right, which surprises me, I guess. It's just not what in the time that I've been here, not what I've necessarily expected of the Maneater.
I feel like it has to do definitely with. I feel like because of so many people coming in, like actually on like I guess the switching off the baton or like getting people like to actually come in to the Maneater and like write for them. I feel like enough people the freshman class and the sophomore class have come in and gone, I want to see things being done differently. I think it makes for like a safer space for them to like not have to like stick with the university's opinion necessarily.
Right.
I know.
I don't know that I know anybody that writes for the Maneater, and I'm sure at some point I've had students that do. I don't know that I do, but really just like I feel like their journalism has like really been on it and really been supportive. I mean their letters from or like op-ed pieces and like letters from the editor and stuff like that like have been smart and on point, and it's been really good to have that kind of stuff going on campus. And compared to my undergrad institution, Butler, which I love, this year they've had an opposite problem that the student newspaper was writing things critical of the university, and not quite the same things we were dealing with, but stuff dealing with money and fairness and the ways the university was handling some things, and so the university replaced the professor who was the managing editor of the newspaper. Now didn't like fire him, but was like, no, you're going to be teaching 4 classes a semester. You're no longer managing editor of the newspaper. And the person they replaced the managing editor of the newspaper with was the university's PR guy.
That's not subtle in any way.
Right? No, not at all. Not at all. And like, I'm very rarely embarrassed by Butler in the news the way that I'm often embarrassed by Mizzou in the news, or at least Mizzou's administration, not Mizzou itself. But I was just like, damn it, guys, come on. And I think it was about the time that Mizzou was finally like finalizing, like, no, we're not gonna reinstitute Planned Parenthood's privileges and all this stuff. I was like, really, like, both places that I've spent like a total of like close to a half of my life. You guys are you're making me look bad here. Like, this is my pedigree that you guys are making me look like an asshole.
I feel like there's being like a freshman student at a university. It's very odd because like you're saying, these places you spent nearly half your life being at. It's weird that there's, at least in my mind, it's kind of an odd concept that there's people who the university is not just where they get the degree or where they know people. It's like it's so engraved into like this chapter in their life. And me myself coming just in and joining the protests and being part of the discussion, I think there's something to be said about these like, I guess like old generation, new generation, like students coming together. Like, did you feel any of that coming into the graduate protests? Like, did you feel like students were engaging outside of the graduate series?
Yeah, I do. Like, I mean, there were lots of undergrads at the protests. There were people who were, when we were initially, before we had sort of our set of demands and things like that, we were getting people to sign petitions, and like undergrads were signing them as well as grad students. People were really engaged. And then when we had the big protests on the walkout day, I mean, that clearly was not only graduate students, right? And it was undergrads, faculty, and even staff. Even staff came out in support. And I do think that was like I said, or maybe I didn't quite clearly say, like, it was the first time I felt really connected to Mizzou. Like, I feel really connected to Butler because it's my undergrad school and it's sort of where I really reached adulthood, right? Like, and it was very formative. I mean, that was the reason, going there was the reason I decided I wanted to become a professor. And then here, I feel really connected to my advisors, I feel really connected to my colleagues, but I never really identified with Mizzou, right? Like, I only own a Mizzou t-shirt. I've been here for 7 years. I've gone to 2 Mizzou basketball games. When I was at Butler, like, I went to more than 2 games a year. Like, I was very much like into Butler. But I think like part of it is too, like, the nature of graduate work is, at least in a lot of fields, like, I'm just by myself reading all the time, or by myself writing all the time. So it's very much like a relationship between me and the people I talk to about my work. but the protest, like how many people came out, that sort of, for me, like, made me feel connected to a Mizzou community in a way that I hadn't for years prior.
I think it's a good place to end on.